Hi! Welcome to my Godot from Zero tutorial series. Over the following parts, I am going to show you how to make stuff, how to make games in Godot when you are a complete beginner to programming and the GD script and Godot in general. So I will be going quite slow for this, trying to anyway. If I miss anything or if anything isn't quite clear yet, please do leave a comment under this video, and I will be trying to go into more detail there later. So, when you first start up Godot, you should end up in this project manager. You can click the new project button here. I've already done that. It gives you this, and you can name your project. I'm just gonna name mine Godot from Zero. Great project. You don't actually have to put underscores there. That's just a habit of mine from naming files like this. So yeah, create folder puts this into the project path here, unless you want to change that first. We can keep the render on default. It doesn't really matter right now. And here we are. All we have right now is an empty project. The exact order of these different fields here might be a bit different for you. What you can do here is there are some dock positions here, so I can click these to move different parts around and put everything where I want it to be. So right now I have this scene here. This gives me any information on the current object I'm working on in the game. If I want this thing to go over here, I can do that. It has its own bar now, or I can move it in the same part as these, so you have to click these and only be able to see one of them at a time. I'm gonna move my scene back here because, actually yeah, I should click this now. I'm gonna move my scene back here, so I have everything in the layout I am personally used to. But you can adjust your layout however you like. Now, this here is currently in 3D mode. You can see a whole large 3D area. We don't care for that. I am going to be working in 2D here because it's easier. So just to start out, let's create a new 2D node. Now, what these nodes are basically nodes or scenes. It's essentially the same thing in Godot. They are every object you are going to have inside of your game. Every single object and every part of that object, again, is also a scene. So this here is just an empty 2D object. So all this node 2D really means is we are working in two-dimensional space and we can hold some form of information here. It doesn't really do anything on its own, it just exists in two-dimensional space, x-axis and y-axis. Now we can give this one a name. We can call it, let's say we call it player. So now this is the player scene. We can give this gameplay later. We can tell it to do all kinds of things. We can make it look in a particular way. Let's say we give it a child node. And what a child node does is it takes another node or scene, however you want to call it, and makes it part of this parent scene right here. So let me just show you. I can just take another node 2D, so it doesn't really do anything again. It's just another basic one, and I could give this a name. Let's say I call it body. So now your player theoretically can have information about his body that's separate from the player itself. Or any of these other things. I can technically add anything. We're gonna stay away from the spatial nodes and the control nodes, because spatial means three-dimensional, so everything is just basically the same, but one dimension more complex. And control nodes are used to make a user interface. We are going to go more into that eventually, but for now let's stick to Node 2D, the stuff you really need if you want to make a 2D game. Now, if we want the player to be visible for starters, I think being able to see it is a good start. We can add a sprite node right here, or we can just type in a search bar up here, sprite, and it should come up in the list under Node 2D. We don't care about spatial, go away. So if I just double click this or click the create button, either one works. This is now added here. I'm gonna ignore the body for now. I'm gonna delete this. I'll probably create that again later. So now we have a sprite node. Sprite refers to essentially any kind of image you want to use inside of your game. So if I take the icon.png that comes with Godot, that's just the Godot icon, same one you see up here. I can put that, I can just drag that from my file system and add it into the texture of the sprite. And now it's visible. That's basically the Godot symbol in our game now. I can even, let's save that and let's run it. Here I can play this specific scene. So that's this tab here. Anything currently shown on this tab is gonna play when I click play scene. And we can see here, up in the left corner, we have the Godot icon in our game. It's not gonna do anything much yet. I can move it with some shortcuts. I just used the W key to set this into move mode. Or you can just click it up here. You can rotate, you can scale it, all kinds of things. Or I'm gonna undo that because I don't want that. So yeah, we can have that. We can have, this is just the general purpose mode. You can technically move stuff around, but it can be a bit wonky because you might sometimes select things accidentally. So yeah, gotta be careful about which mode you use, and everything is fine. Now I'm actually going to move the sprite back to the origin, the 0, point, because the sprite is part of our player. And if I move the sprite over here, then our player is still centered here. We don't want that. We want the sprite to be right on our player. At least for now. Nice. So what I can do instead is I can move the player, but it doesn't really make much sense when the player is just on its own. So instead of that, let's create a level. I just click the little plus to create another new scene. Alternatively, you can create a new scene here or click on scene, new scene. Plenty of ways to add a scene. Either way, we are selecting 2D scene again, since we don't want to change from that just yet. Now this here is our, let's see, do I call it level or world? It doesn't really matter. Let's call it world for now. There we go. And now I can take this player scene that's saved down here and drag it into the world. So now it exists here. This player is now part of the world. So I can position it inside the world. This blue rectangle here shows up our current screen space. We don't have any cameras yet or something to move the screen around. So right now this blue box is just anything that's visible, that's gonna be visible on screen when we open it like this. So we're pretty much in the center. Now at this point, we probably want to start by actually being able to move the player. I'm gonna attach a script to the player. For now it can just have the same name, player script, that's fine. Keep everything on default, it really doesn't matter much. So what we do here is, let's see, first of all, let us define a variable. It already explained some stuff here, I'm gonna remove that, I'm explaining everything from scratch. So, let's say we want to decide how fast our player can move. So what we can do for that is we create a variable by typing var and then the name of it. I'm just gonna call it speed. You can name it whatever you want. And then equals some number. Let's say our speed is 10. We don't really know what units we are working with here just yet, so it really doesn't matter what number we're using. But we want some number in here just so we can test it out later. And yeah, figure out the rest from there. So this variable can really hold a whole lot of things. Right now we're putting in a number. Instead of a number, we could also put in text. For text, we just use these quotation marks. We can just put any text here, any text. But that's not what speed refers to, so we're not doing that. We're putting in a number. There are a few other things we can put in there, but I'll go over them when we actually have a use for them. So now that we have a speed, let's actually create a function that allows us to move with it. So we can do func to tell it that it's a function, so this is going to run at runtime. Or at least it's going to be possible to call it at runtime, but there are specific functions that are already known to Godot that were pre-built essentially. These are part of the Node2D scene or object that already exists ahead of time. So what we can use is physics process. We can just let this autocomplete here. So physics process is the recommended function that should be used whenever you want to move things in game that could interact with anything else. The delta here essentially means how much time has passed since this function last ran. So this function is going to run over and over and over again whenever the game does anything. Let's see, we have our position. And our position is a vector that has a .x value and a .y value. These are also already known. These are part of Node2D. Every Node2D has these. If you want a complete list of what kind of things exist on a node, you can actually hold the control key and click Node2D. And you will see a whole lot of information about how it works and what it can do. So let's see. Yeah, we have position in here. It's default a vector 2. Then if you want to know what a vector 2 is, again, you can look that up and continue with all of these things. There's a lot of information here. I'm not going to go over all of it. But yeah, this is essentially where you can find how all of these things work individually, since it's pretty much not possible for any tutorial to cover every single feature. So in our case, let's just move to the right. So we say position.x plus equals speed. Plus equals is actually a shortcut. This means the same thing as if we were to write position.x is equal to position.x plus speed. This is a bit long, so we don't actually end up writing it this way. This just means we want to add speed to that. And that's going to happen. So now let's see what actually happens at this speed. Whee! And the other player moves. Now if we do that in the world, we start in the center and move from there. That's fine. But not really what we want to happen. This is just a start. We can do the same thing for the Y position, of course. I'm just going to run this quick just to show, and we move down. That's actually a thing that might be a bit unintuitive to people who have never worked with game engines before. Because in mathematics, the plus direction, when you add something to X, it goes to the right. We do the same thing here. But in mathematics, the Y direction normally is, well, most of the time anyway, goes up. We don't do that here. The Y direction goes down. We start at the upper left corner of the screen, that is 0, 0. Then we go right for the X direction and down for the Y direction, and that's how all of our positions are calculated. Now, another issue we're going to come into if we use just plus equals speed, it means that if anything lags, if anything on your computer slows down, our speed is going to change because we are ignoring how much time passed since this function was called last. It might not always be the exact same time. So if your computer is really slow, it's gonna move to the side really slowly. If your computer is really fast, it's gonna just whoop and disappear. In that case, we want to multiply our speed by delta. So now this speed is how far we are actually going to move in every second. Delta is usually going to be much smaller than a second. I hope it is. It should usually be a lot smaller than a second. So our speed actually is going to be multiplied with like 0.00 something on a fast machine, which makes our speed actually a lot smaller now. So 10 might not move us very far. Let's take a look. So yeah, right now we can actually see it moving fine still, but earlier it moved very quickly to the end of the screen, and now, yeah, snail's pace. So if we want to change that, we can just increase the number to account for this. Whoop, that's a bit faster, that's fine. Let's keep that for now. And now we want some keyboard input. I'm actually going to go into the project settings up here, clicking the input map, and there's a bunch of stuff predefined, but that's all for the user interface, so we don't care about that right now. Instead, let us define actions, let's say up, down, left, right. So this is our ability to move. And we can click the little plus icon next to each of these events down here, or rename them, but yeah, we can click this and say what do we want to use for this. So if we want to define a key, we can now just press any key to define that this action would be triggered by it. So if I use the W key, W is now defined as up. I can also add a second one if I say want to use the up arrow key. I can do the same thing for all the others. So down, no, not enter, down. And left is A and left arrow. And right is D as well as right arrow. And with that we have some input events we can call in here. So let's see what's gonna happen. We can do input.isActionPressed, and we just say right. Okay, now we say if this happens, so if the right action is pressed, then we want to move to the right at this speed. So earlier this just always ran, so we were constantly moving to the right. Now we only move to the right when the right button, in our case that's the right arrow and D, like either one of them, is pressed. So if this action is currently pressed. Let's test it. I'm not touching anything, nothing is moving. I'm touching the D button. It starts moving fine, I let go of the D button, it stops moving fine. That's all it does. Simple. So yeah, this is basically just the same as in the English language. If this happens, then we do a colon. The colon says whatever comes after is what happens as well. And here we need a little tab. The same thing happens here if we are inside of a function. Essentially this indentation here shows us where something ends. So if I declare a variable here, let's say var temp equals hello, then this is still part of this function. It's only going to exist within this function because it's inside the indentation. If I create it down here, hello, this now exists inside this entire code, since that's where it's positioned. So yeah, indentation, very important in the GD script language. So let's do the same thing here. If input.isActionPressed left position.x minus equals speed times delta. So this is just the multiply symbol. Minus equals works the same as plus equals, just for minus. So I think you can figure what happens here. If we press left, we move left. Let's test it. We can move right still, stop, and we can move left. Works fine. Easy. Next. Let's do the same thing for up and down. And just copy that. Paste. Paste. Make this one up. And this one down. So for up, what do we want to do? We want to do position.y, since we're on the y-axis now, and we want to say Up is actually the minus direction. Like I said before, plus goes down. So we say minus equals here, speed times delta. Position.y plus equals, when we're moving down, speed times delta. Okay, so very basics. We can move. Now if I press any of the buttons, I can move around in this space. That's fine. If I want to do that in the world, I can click the world tab, run that one. We start in the middle, we can move here just fine. Now if we're in the world here and we actually add several players, just to quickly showcase what happens, let's rotate this one. And you can see they actually are going to end up moving exactly the same way, so when one moves, the other one moves the same. The rotation for now doesn't actually affect any of that, because we don't change what axis we're on. This is still the x-axis, this is still the y-axis, even if this one's rotated. Up is still up there, down is still down here, and so on. I'm going to remove this one again. And that is actually going to be all for the first part. In the second part, I'm going to show you how we can change this up a little, letting us interact with some objects in a simple way. That will be all for today. Bye.